The first thing that I would say that legal services lawyers should know about how to engage lawyers in responding to disasters is that everybody wants to help. People primarily are motivated to do pro bono work because they want to help people in need. And especially after a disaster, when you see the images, and maybe even you yourself or your families and friends have also been impacted, you as a lawyer often want to find a way to figure out how to help people right then and there. But the other thing that I think that lawyers need to keep in mind, and I think that lawyers know that after they've responded to disaster situations, is that the legal needs that people have not only change over time, but that they are going to be there for years to come. That relief and that rebuilding process is a long-term proposition. It's important to DLA Piper to support the fellows who are working in disaster relief because we want to help and we want to be a part of that. It's a very much of a symbiotic relationship between legal service providers and private law firms. We can't help those in our communities without the help of the legal service providers. So we have very close relationships with them, and the opportunity to help Equal Justice Works fellows in any kind of way that we can is not only a real honor, but it's a privilege to be able to help those that are really in the trenches in our communities that see the needs up close. They can help us help others. I think the skills that legal services lawyers or lawyers who are working in legal services need to have in order to reach out to private lawyers asking them to do pro bono work are, number one, a vision for what they want and what the help that they need from the private sector, but also the ability to just communicate really well about what are the needs and what do you think are ways that we might be able to help. But also having an open mind and really creating open communication with the law firm so that we can brainstorm together. You know, how can our lawyers help? What skills do we have that we might be able to bring to bear to help on a certain issue? You really need that open dialogue, and I think you really need to be persistent because sometimes our lawyers and lawyers in general may not be able to help in that moment, but they may be able to help weeks from now or months from now. And everybody really does want to do their part and to help and do pro bono work. I think some best practices that lawyers can use when they're reaching out to a law firm to really identify pro bono support is recognizing that many law firms have full-time pro bono professionals, whether they're pro bono partners or pro bono counsel or coordinators. And that can be that first conversation. Having a conversation with that full-time pro bono professional will help that lawyer understand what kind of pro bono work does the firm do, what are the resources it can bring to bear, what kind of capacity do they have, and also have a brainstorming conversation about what would be a great project that you could potentially develop together.
So HBL was created by the Houston Bar Association, and our mission is really twofold. We are here to help the residents of Harris County mainly, or the greater Houston, who cannot afford private attorneys, but also in order to encourage volunteerism among attorneys. So everything we do really is kind of geared towards making sure that we do both. We cannot be successful without our partnerships that we have built with, firms, whether they are, in-house counsel, whether they are litigators, and that's kind of how we are able to meet the need. Now, if you look at the numbers in Harris County, you have around 11,000 households who really do not have access to legal aid. And only 1 of 5 of them get some kind of help, which is at the smaller level. So that's why, using pro bono attorneys is really the way to go in order to be able to serve the number of people that we need to serve. The other thing that we kind of, in a way, distinguishes us is that because partly we're, are part of the Bar Association and we have their funding, we do not have all the restrictions that some other legal service providers have. So we are able to serve people who up to Usually it's 200 of the poverty guidelines, but then for special kind of individuals, we have also the ability to serve up to 250 for the tax cases, 300 for the Harvey, and people with disabilities or veterans. We also can help people whether they have status or no status or mixed status. So that's also another way where we are able to help. And now in terms of disaster, we also found that mostly attorneys really want to help. I mean, they see the waters all over the place, and they see people hurting. And it's part of why we went to law school, I believe. I mean, part of it is to give access to justice to people. So that's, I would say, is our main existence. But in order to make this happen, we also work very hard to find ways to make it easier for pro bono attorneys to work. Because if somebody is practicing in a different area, one of the worst things they are afraid of is, do I mess people's lives? So that's kind of another very important aspect of how we do things and why we do them the way we do them, in order to make sure there's enough support, there's enough help, that people don't feel they're on their own. So that's it.
Great. And then we're going to stick at the beginning, at least, with sort of the legal aid organization perspective. So I'm going to pass to Jay Collier to talk a little bit about working with Lone Star Legal Aid, how their program works, and especially in the wake of disaster recovery, what the response was.
Okay, thank you. We also, Lone Star Legal Aid, serve the poverty community. We cover 72 counties in Texas. We are one of the largest legal aids nationwide, actually. And we also focus on the initial eligibility criteria that Wafa just referred to, which is up to 200% of the poverty guidelines. And we also have some sort of other programs that can do a little bit more service for other categories, but the majority of our practice is in that eligibility level. And post-Harvey, well, first let me say, Lone Star Legal Aid is sort of in the business of disaster recovery at this point. I'm sure you all have heard from Sandra Brown during this training, who has been responding to disasters since, Allison, maybe prior, everything from oil issues, refinery explosions, to actual natural disasters like hurricanes. And so over the years, we have sort of carved out a niche area where we have forged relationships with both other organizations in our community and federal administrations, so they know who we are and they know that we do this. And so Lone Star Legal Aid sort of prides itself on responding in these situations. Now, post-Harvey, the largest issue that we had was scaling. Although we had the institutional knowledge and we do always maintain a disaster recovery unit, what we could not do was scale to the incredible number of people who were impacted by that storm in the time allotted. And as many of you also probably know, we had an explosion and lost our building, so we didn't have things like computers and paper and that sort of thing that you would just expect to be able to hit the ground running with. And so what pro bono meant to us post-Harvey was beyond what I could even explain. We received in-kind pro bono services, things as simple as, can you run me 500 copies of this flyer in 3 languages, because we need to be in the shelters explaining the next steps to people. That's the sort of things that the firms around the Houston area stepped up and did for us. In a typical situation, we may have been able to handle that, but the pro bono community represents the ability to scale and to do things like that. We had help from everyone to Baker Botts, DLA Piper, Latham Watkins, if you name it. The pro bono community came out in force for us. And so then the next issue became managing that response, because the help is always welcome, but you have to wield that help in a way that is most efficient and effective. And so the logistics of that was a learning experience for me. This is my first disaster response on this level. I was serving Colorado, Matagorda, Brazoria, and Wharton counties prior, which they do experience their share of disaster. A lot of it has to do with flooding down there. But this, like I said earlier, was a much larger affected area. And so the logistics was something that we learned on the fly, and then hopefully throughout this presentation today, I can discuss a little bit more about how we were able to manage the response to the crisis and to actually use the huge pro bono response in a way that got people where they needed to be quickly. But I don't know how much you want to go into that yet, but that's what Lone Star did afterwards. We were immediately in the shelters. We were in the disaster recovery centers, trying to get the first steps. Things as basic as you have to muck and gut. You have to do these mitigating things in order for FEMA to then come in and provide you with the assistance that you need. It's just basic legal information, disaster recovery response on the ground that you need right away. And so that was our first stage after Harvey.
Great, thank you. Actually, don't think many people in the room did realize that Lone Star's office also post-Harvey was burned, and I had read about it before coming there myself in the New Yorker and found that to be shocking. A good example of, a great part of the legal community coming together. So I'll pass to Lisa, if that's okay, to talk a little bit about from the firm side of pro bono work and how that comes together.
Sure, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting DLA Piper to be a part of this. It's wonderful to meet all of you. Congratulations on being disaster relief fellows. That's amazing. And I have to say, just hearing from our legal service provider friends, you all are really our heroes and heroines. The first responders really in the trenches helping people and then helping us figure out ways that we can also help. And so we are so grateful to the legal service provider community for everything that you do. So I am the pro bono partner at DLA Piper. I'm actually based in our Washington, D.C. office and help direct and manage our firm's pro bono program throughout the United States. We have over 20 offices and close to 1,400 lawyers. And I have the great pleasure of working with pro bono coordinators across the country, including my partner, Ileana Blanco, who's based here in Houston. And the way we do pro bono is that all of our lawyers are expected to do pro bono and are engaged in our pro bono programs in different ways. And there's all kinds of things that we do as part of that pro bono program, including having several signature projects or areas of focus. But certainly responding to disasters is part of that. And we, many of our people, and I appreciated Wafa's comments about people want to help when disasters happen, and that's exactly right. Everybody wants to feel like they can do something to be helpful. And of course, that happened at DLA Piper and at law firms across the country after the series of disasters in 2017. And we can certainly get into different ways that we did that. But I think we've also learned some things because our law firm was also involved in working with the Mississippi Center for Justice and the Lawyers Committee. And I understand that you heard from Riley Morse maybe yesterday or Monday. As part of the training. And we first got to know Riley after Hurricane Katrina and working with MCJ on the ground there on heirs property work. And that was just an amazing experience for our law firm and actually allowed us to have lawyers from all across the country who were engaged in that work. And so in terms of leveraging resources and really thinking about the potential there, I think that is certainly one example that I would be happy to share more about. But thank you so much for having us.
Okay, great. And then Ileana Blanco, if you wouldn't mind talking especially about the pro bono programs here in Houston and some of the, maybe even the response that you got from people right after Harvey as well.
Well, absolutely. And just echoing Lisa's comments, it is a pleasure and a privilege to be here. But I wanted to just say that for the fellows here, for the panelists here, The desire to do pro bono work is one of the reasons that y'all went to law school and are doing what you're doing. It is not really the primary motivator for most lawyers. So one of the challenges in working at a global law firm is how do you motivate the lawyers to do pro bono work? Not because they're bad people, not because they're not interested in helping others, but because there's so many other things, the business, the billable work that is also vying for their attention. One of the things that firms do to motivate people to do pro bono work is, as in DLA Piper, require it. It is a mandatory 60 to 80 hours a year requirement for all attorneys across the board to do pro bono work, and that impacts evaluations and that impacts bonuses for associates. But the important thing is, regardless of how they're motivated, once you get somebody doing a pro bono case, once you have someone answering legal lines and assisting someone whose landlord is threatening to throw them out and report them to ICE because they're not documented for the sole purpose of trying to rent out that apartment to somebody who needs it and can pay a higher rent as a result of being dislocated from Harvey, you get a righteous indignation to people and a desire to serve that might not have otherwise been there. So it is important for the Houston office of DLA Piper to be responsive to Houston pro bono needs, and there wasn't a single person in our office that wasn't somehow affected by Harvey. We had a lawyer who lost his house. It had to literally be rescued, him, his wife, his 2 children. They lived in the Meyerland area, so they had to be rescued out by boat. And that impacts a person, obviously. And the office as a collective was there to help him and his family with evacuating, with getting his home taken care of afterwards. It became a total loss, actually, and helping them move. And what struck all of us as we were there is here's a person, a lawyer who is very well employed, whose wife's family is here, who was rescued, who immediately had access to the storage facility, to support system, to a new apartment, and the emotional toll that it took on his family was immeasurable. And when that kind of experience touches a lawyer personally, that also motivates that person to try to get out there and help others in the community. So my one message to you is to really, in your agencies, be politely persistent with how you reach out to law firms in your area, whether you're in Florida or whether you're here, because a no answer does not mean no, never. It really just means no, not right now, but call me back in a few weeks or in a few months when I will have the ability to help you.
Okay, great. And so I'm gonna do this as a question and answer piece. I have some myself, but feel free to jump in if there are things that strike all the rest of you. One of the things I wanted to do was ask Lisa and Ileana what it is that makes a strong pro bono program at a firm. What are the factors that you're looking for in that case?
Yeah, in terms of a relationship with a legal service provider, yeah. So certainly, I mean, the number one thing that we're motivated by, and everything I'm saying is kind of in the context of why we're here today in terms of the kinds of agencies that you're working at in the communities locally. But certainly number one is what are the needs in the communities? And that's where we really are relying so much on you. You know, you're the ones that are in the trenches, and so having that open communication with you and your organizations about what are the needs, what do people need, where are the gaps, where can we add value? We really rely on you to share that information with us. And then second, certainly we're looking at what are our lawyers either interested in or what are their skills. You know, again, where where can we be helpful, depending on what lawyers we have in that location, what kind of skills that they have, practice areas, that sort of thing. Pro bono is an excellent professional development opportunity for many of our lawyers, and an opportunity to exercise certain skills that we may not be able to always have those opportunities on a day-to-day basis, and so that's really interesting to people. And the opportunity to have clients and to be able to help people in the community. So I think, really having, again, that close relationship with you and your agencies, to have that open communication about what is it that you need, and then we try to figure out on our end, how can we best think through different projects or programs or ways that our lawyers can bring their skills to bear to help you accomplish that.
Yeah, the thing that is incredible to me is that we have attorneys who are highly experienced, highly intelligent, and highly motivated, and might feel intimidated by taking on a pro bono project that would be very simple from an objective perspective. So an additional motivating factor is your ability to sell to the lawyer you're asking to help, your ability to help that lawyer with the project. The idea that once that lawyer gets the project or the case or the matter, she will not be abandoned, and that you'll be available as a resource is really important. And the truth is that once the lawyer gets over that initial hurdle of, I've never done this before, so I can't do it, oh, now I understand what I need to do, she won't be bothering you. They'll figure it out, and you'll be able to go on to your next prospect.
And oftentimes, so we can just add one more point on that, it's such a great example, because once our lawyers do something once, then we can hopefully mentor each other internally, which is really what the signature project model is based on, so that we definitely rely on our legal service provider friends to provide mentoring, great training, screening of cases, really making sure that we have the right expectations in terms of what we are expecting when we're engaging in something. But then once we dig in, we're really able to do a lot of that also at the firm. And I do want to mention one thing. There's the great Karen Lash wrote a law review article several years ago called Pitching Pro Bono, Getting to First Base with the Big Firm, which I understand is in your materials, but I strongly recommend it to you because there's very practical tips in there and examples of how best to pitch the different pro bono to law firms and what law firms are really looking at, and we can definitely get into more detail on that.
I just wanted, when I talked about, in general, what we do, I did not really talk about what we did after Harvey. But what made me kind of think of that when you talk about how to pitch it, and so timing also is really important. So when the water was all over, I mean, because we already had a portal, it was easy to kind of scale it up. And we kind of coordinated 1,000 shifts of attorneys who wanted to help. And so we tried to have everybody at least do one, because everybody wanted to participate and really help. But then when you looked at the people who were impacted, at that point in the NRCs, in the shelter, their main interest was really, I need food, I need safety. They had some questions, but it wasn't really the time where they needed to deal with legal issues. So we had like 700 attorneys who wanted to help when you did not have the same, kind of cases that are available, or individuals who really know what they are going to need in terms of legal assistance. And it is a fact, too, that people sometimes, even after they have all their basics, they still don't know whether the issue they're having is really an issue that requires kind of a legal assistance or can be helped. So this is kind of, I agree with you, this is a very important role for nonprofits to play, is to even, kind of the outreach, the creating all these questions that help people really figure out, do I have a legal issue that can be, I can get help with, and then, figuring out whether this is a case that is appropriate for the firms to be able to kind of handle. So now I think as, kind of fellows, people are not at the same level of when they were seeing the water all over. So, selling it requires a lot more than what was happening there, because their attorneys were just coming, and sometimes we didn't really know exactly what to do with them. But so that's why we had many of them give advice. We asked for help with as Jay said, also with making copies, with even updating, let's say, the manual for disaster relief. So there are all kinds of things you can get them involved with. But I think at this point, when people are ready to have their legal cases handled, it's kind of creating the same interest and enthusiasm, and getting the firms to really kind of is going to be something that we all need to work on. I mean, that's so.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on that. You were in my head. I wanted to say also, you made a statement that no doesn't mean never. Later comes. So one thing we learned was that after the water receded and attorneys had to go back to their cases, and it was actually also the holidays at that point. So we're rolling into Thanksgiving and Christmas. People who were initially still interested, were saying, I'm going to be out of the country. I'm not going to be here. I can't take a case right now. And I was confident in saying, that's great, I'm going to call you in January, we'll still have work for you. And we did, because one thing that we learned during this disaster is important to communicate to people outside of legal services organizations, is that disaster legal needs come in waves.
Yeah.
Right, so in the initial response, you're talking about FEMA assistance, you're talking about, just I need a basic award so I can survive. But what's coming next is foreclosures and bankruptcies and family disputes, because I picked up and moved and I don't have an order from the court that says I can live in this other county, and we have standing orders that say I need to be here. Or my child has reasonable accommodations in their school, they just put them in a completely different school district, and their needs are not being addressed there. So the needs continue to roll in. And it's good to have a holistic approach to helping your client. So there are cases that we kept in-house for the initial response, but those people were still there with other legal needs that could be served later on. So that's one thing I did want to say, that if the pro bono says we can help later, great, you'll need them later also. Like, there's no reason to write them off. And also breaking up cases is important. So, and I worked with Lauren a little bit, and I know that there are cases that we can do part and then take the other part and give it to a pro bono. So we had a lot of people who could not get FEMA assistance because they had title issues, ownership issues, and where a pro bono may be out of town and not able to resolve those ownership issues. Once we got that resolved, they would take on the rest of the appeal. Okay, you've established ownership to the point that FEMA says they'll accept it through an affidavit of heirship or whatever. And now we'll take the document you got filed and we'll run with it. And so that's a collaborative approach to getting the client the help they need without overwhelming your pro bono to do more steps than they're able to do at that point. So that's another thing that we learned through this crisis.
That's a great point. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think too, on the firm side on that, I mean, it's such an important message, which is that it takes years and years to recover from these kinds of disasters, right? And so you're right, everybody wants to help in that moment when you see the images, and we all can in different ways. And I think talking about the in-kind contributions and other ways that law firms can be helpful. But I think also we're telling our lawyers as well, like these legal needs are going to be there for years. And the work that we did that I mentioned after Hurricane Katrina, that project did not come to full fruition until at least a year or more after that disaster hit. And so
we actually still have cases.
We do.
That.
Yes,
I mean, it's really, it continues.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. So my next question was actually a little bit, it's very timely, in that there's sort of this question in my mind of when you have a pro bono attorney or a large group of them with very deep knowledge on property law, and you're handing them a FEMA appeal, and that might not be something for a low-income individual, might not be something they've ever dealt with before. what's the level of training, what's the expectation on the firm side for initial training, and then sort of, how do you make that something you can duplicate over and over again for a large event like this?
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'll jump in. And I'm not 100% clear on the law firm expectations for each different case type, but one thing we have learned, and now we're doing sort of a post-crisis analysis of what we need to have established, is that we absolutely need to cultivate a group of disaster experts within our pro bono community so that there can be ongoing training after the crisis, in the years where there is not a hurricane, and moving forward, so that there are various people in the community who can continue that training either in-house or what we're looking at establishing is something like an expert chatbot where the pro bonos can chat with an expert who's taking a shift at answering their questions, because they do need, I think if you give someone a case that's not in their practice area and they're going out on a limb to help, they should be supported all the way through, and they should never feel that they've been left out to sort of learn an area of law on the fly, because they're doing an assistance for both your client and for you. And so that's something that we are definitely cultivating at this point, a way of immediate, real-time support while someone is working a case. Because we're lawyers. You could be working a case in the middle of the night. You could be working a case on a Saturday. You should be able to get assistance at that time. So I think the support aspect is very real, and getting training in a format that works for busy lawyers. So everyone can't sit through an hour of live training. We tried to this year stretch out post-Harvey and have some reading materials, some webinar, some little 10, 15-minute videos, because we wanted it to be in a digestible format that fits into someone's schedule who also has their own docket of cases. So we're trying to stretch out and really diversify into training that everyone can find their fit there.
So I wanted to add something about that. Definitely just handling pro bono, you need to have all the resources that are possible, what you talked about, whether they are, kind of forums, examples, trainings, webinars, mentors, and all kind of other resources that you need to have available. And you need to develop mentors within. But I also feel like you, as the legal fellows, this is one of the most important roles you can play, is you become the actual mentor, the person who the attorney can go back to at any moment and ask, I can't, what form do I need for this, or can you help me with some of these things? And as organization, whenever we're working on a certain area, we kind of really do a lot of research and prepare all the materials that we think they can need. But again, it's not something that happens once. When they take a case, okay, through our portal, they have all the, trainings and things like that, but it's emerging. And also, one of the areas you can help them, because as nonprofits, we've worked with these clients on a regular basis. And when it's time for a disaster, maybe the client is not answering the phone. And of course, when you are, not in your house, or, you don't have all, it becomes even harder. So I think that's also one of the areas you can be very supportive to the pro bono attorney by really helping them figure out different ways how to get in touch with their clients, how to also find other needs that the client, somebody who is at crisis cannot work with an attorney. So some of the work that we do too is really helping the client find the resources that they need within the community to meet all their other needs in order to work with the attorney, as well as creating different ways, like, have family members you can call. Some people respond to phones. So all of these things, in addition to the actual expertise, is very important in terms of, I feel, meeting the needs for pro bono attorneys. Because some of them have never worked with these clients.
Yeah, my viewpoint on that is when you approach a pro bono lawyer, your first words should be, "This is so easy." I'd be doing it myself, except I've got 20 other cases. So, you first get down that barrier of unfamiliarity. And then to the extent that you already have a pre-prepared package of materials, forms that the lawyers can follow, you will get a lot better response. Yes, you want to be a resource that's available so she can call you up if she gets stuck on a form. But the more information, the more flow chart, this is what happens, and then this is what happens, and this what happens, the more likely you are to get success at someone taking your case. One of the biggest frustrations as a private practitioner that I have found in pro bono matters is that sometimes with the best intentions, the organization will give a packet like this thick, and about this much is history of FEMA as we know it. None of it which is going to help with that claim. I don't need to know the Supreme Court challenges to FEMA or which presidential debates there have been. I mean, this might be interesting to a FEMA historian if such exists, but to the person who's handling the case, it's not helpful. I mean, no one is going to want to read that, and if they start reading that and think they have to read that before they can help, it's going to be detrimental to taking the case. So keep it on a need-to-know basis, and if later on that person wants to have a theological or ideological, I should say, discussion about pros and cons of insurance and so forth, great. But in order to help the client, the simpler you keep it, and the more written information for the lawyer to get from point A to point Z, the more successful you're going to be in getting a partner.
I mean, but I also feel that don't assume that the pro bono attorneys are not going to do their role. Because, I mean, prior to working here, I worked with immigration. And, I had really busy attorneys who worked on asylum cases that required 220, hours of working closely with the clients and doing a lot of the legwork. So really, it's a matter of understanding the firm culture, the firm needs, or the specific attorney. So some really would prefer to feel that immediate impact on the clients, and they want to do more than just having the ready form. So it's really being flexible enough to understand what is it that this specific firm, and that's why we invest so much time in getting to know the pro bono coordinators, in understanding the firm's culture and what they want, because some of them really don't want the kind of clean packaged things, and some will not take a case unless you do that. So be flexible, understand the actual needs, and what really motivates them to take the cases.
So this is coming on a little bit from just a conversation with Jay. One of the things that surprised me was hearing about how it wasn't just Houston lawyers that were responding and reaching out from the private bar, that it was people in Seattle, and so could you talk a little bit about, from both sides, I guess, that nationwide effort to sort of work on, I know you said there's plans with probono.net to really harness that for in the future, just because it's a really compelling story to reach out.
Well, a lot of people know by name Ellen Joseph. She is pro bono counsel for Vincent and Elkins. And she's also, I don't know if she is this year, but she and Brenda Devaney serve with ABCO, which is the Association of Pro Bono Counsel, which is a nationwide organization. And they basically represent all of the largest firms in the U.S., and some of them, of course, are international firms. And she reached out to all of the legal service providers, and she said, this is my network, you can have it, so send the cases. And from that point, now, don't underestimate Texas, okay? Texas responded. There were hundreds and hundreds of Texas attorneys who responded through the state bar. We want to help. The difference is a lot of them were in the Houston area and were also recovering themselves, right? And so from the ABCO network lending itself to us and us being able to blast cases, I placed every single FEMA appeal case within 3 to 5 days max. I did not post a single case that needed a FEMA appeals attorney that someone didn't pick up from that network. As it turns out, you know, they were in California or New York or Florida, and so then you have a conversation with your client, you're going to receive a phone call with a weird area code. They're going to have an accent that is unfamiliar to you. It is not a bill collector. It is not a scam, because we had a lot of that.
Yeah.
Someone's calling me with this area code and they don't sound like they're from here, and should I be worried? Okay, no, that's your attorney. So we had, you know, there was some cultural sensitivity things we had to do there to make sure they responded. We had Jeff Baker with, what is his university? I don't know, it's escaping me now. In California, he's a professor over the clinics there. Their university picked up our cases. Their clinic took up our cases. And I mean, so again, you have to go with your client and say, we are placing your case outside of our organization. It's very important to let the clients know what is happening next, or they don't respond well to their pro bono attorneys, and that's not fair. So we try to make that transition smooth. And they can do just as good as someone who's down the street from you, because this is a federal issue, this is a national issue, and everyone's going to practice the same way. And then one very fortuitous thing is that we have a pretty robust student volunteer program. And so for the pro bonos that took the cases, we were able to tell them, if these clients don't have smartphones or they can't get to a fax machine, we will send these students to their home and get the paperwork signed and get it back to you. They can ask the questions there and get it back to you. And that's something we needed, because even if someone did have relatively good technology access prior to the hurricane, often afterwards they didn't. And I think that's a good point to touch on, and it's good for the fellows to know when dealing with private bar pro bonos. There are some sort of differences with their clients and our clients that you need to explain. Like some things as simple as, most of our clients have prepaid cell phone plans. If you have something to say, get it all said in the same conversation. It may not be on when you try to call them back. These are like things that legal aid people always think about. Sometimes I ask, how many minutes do you have left? Can I call you back? But that's something you should explain when you're making that transition to, you know, different attorneys who may not practice in the same sort of clientele, but something just to keep in mind.
That's true.
Did you have a question?
I have two, if that's okay. Some cases require a long-term commitment that can span not just that one session, but a couple weeks, couple months, up to a year or more. From a coordinator perspective, how do you go about courting a relationship with a pro bono? And from the pro bono's perspective, what is your thinking when you accept that kind of case that's going to take a long time to resolve?
You want?
Anyone at all? Anyone at all? Well, then I'll go for it. Most of the attorneys at the firms that you are going to be partnering with are very well familiar with the idea that a case is not immediately resolved and that it can linger for years, much less months. And of course, Lisa started talking about how we're still dealing with issues arising from Katrina. So what would be important from your perspective, though, is to be sure that when you're dealing with a pro bono lawyer, that there's a backup. In the event that that person goes to another firm or just changes career path or has something that happens that makes her inaccessible, you want to have someone that you can contact or that she can turn the matter over to so that it's not abandoned. So that's what I would say in terms of the immediate way of handling that.
And I think just, again, managing that expectation when you're placing the case, being very clear up front. And sometimes you may not know, right? I mean, we're all used to that too, especially, you know, Ileana and I are both litigators. I mean, oftentimes you don't know exactly how long a case is going to last. And so just being really upfront and managing that expectation going into it, I think is the most important thing.
And to Wafa's point earlier, there are going to be some lawyers who are going to want to have that longer case so that they can have one-to-one interaction with the client and see the client through this very difficult time, regardless of how long it'll take. So you want to make sure that you've you're in touch with that person and that's the person that's working your case, as opposed to the pro bono lawyer who wants to get everything done, in a week's time, just basis of personality, basis of practice, that kind of thing.
And from our perspective as pro bono organizations, it's always important. I mean, in addition to making sure about the expectation, you have to be really clear to share as much as you know and make sure that they but there are cases when it looks very simple, and then once they start dealing with the facts, then it turns out to be something much more. So it's really important for you as an organization or someone who works with these organizations to be prepared that first, number one, to have more connection with not just the attorney. It's very important to develop real good relationships with the pro bono coordinators, because they can be the one you go to whenever there's something that, something happens, and the attorney, sometimes people have emergencies and they can't kind of handle the case. So you need to have these relationships with the firm. But I also always have told anybody who worked for me, when you place a pro bono case with an attorney, you need to remember it's also our case. I mean, I understand that the attorney of record, they made the commitment, but there were times that I had an asylum case that was really complicated and was thrown on my desk like 2 days. Something happened with the attorney and couldn't do that. I was ready to get up and kind of handle the case. Another thing is very important to keep in mind is that it's also part of your responsibility to keep up with what's happening for the case. So sometimes, you give a case and you assume it's always good to have check-ins. So, we've created that as part of the regular kind of relationship. So we ask for hours, we follow up, at certain intervals and making sure that things are working, checking in with the attorney. Do they need help? Is everything working? Because what you don't want to happen is, for whatever reason, the attorney is not able to handle the case and the client is out there not knowing who they get in touch with. And it's also important for them to know that you do exist as an organization, because you do the initial intake, you're the one who kind of explain to them what's going on. So also keeping that connection and making sure they know who to come to when things are happening is very important. I mean, because we, all of us, despite our best efforts, sometimes, things happen and you are not able to do that. But I never really felt that having a long-term case is really kind of something that pro bono attorneys don't do. Not everybody is ready for that, but many of them really welcome that, and they feel they make a real difference in the life of somebody. Not just kind of, I sat down, I did an estate planning, document for 2 hours, and that's all I know about the client, so.
All right, so we have 2 nonprofit attorneys and 2 private attorneys who make the real money.
Yes,
So
we do.
you're in, it's a good mixed group. Would the 4 of you consider going to the law schools here in our city and doing talks with law students to already start this cultivation of pro bono assistance? I mean, this is an interesting group that I never saw when I was in law school.
Yeah.
I think would be very beneficial for not necessarily you 4, I'm not committing you to this, but for this kind of mixture, to give this kind of talk to future lawyers.
We do.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
We do, but I think it can be expanded on. I think we do it in such limited circumstances because we would like the students to help us with a project, but we could absolutely make it more readily available on a wider scale to the universities. I think that when I was in law school, I knew about it, but I cared about it already, right? So maybe if you came to law school more open, like a blank slate, let me see everything that's there, then that would be beneficial to run across this sort of conversation.
You can see my enthusiasm. I think I love your question because it is something that I do. I actually teach as an adjunct about pro bono and access to justice, and I think it's really important because I didn't really get what you're saying. In law school as much as I could have, in terms of understanding the different roles that lawyers can play, and that you can be in private practice and have the pro bono caseload all the time, as part of that's integrated into your practice there. So I'm so glad you asked the question.
And actually, I feel like, I went to University of Houston, for instance, and I was involved. I mean, my whole career started in nonprofits because when I took the clinic. I mean, that was the first time I did my first asylum claim, and I went to law school wanting to do this, but without that experience, I don't think I would have made the choices or found the right people who would even kind of point me how to start and where to do the work. And I think I continue. I mean, to me, I consider it part of what I do regularly. Keep the relationship with the University of Houston. So we go to all the career kind of days in order to just give a glimpse of what you can do in different but I don't think, I mean, what I like about your idea is the fact that you combine, showing the two type of practices and how, it's not only the public interest who really help the people. It's also important for law students to understand, even as you go to become work with a big firm, you still can do a lot of good in a different way. And it is really a collaboration, honestly, between the two worlds that kind of produces this.
Yeah,
and
it's
important
very much
to
of a
highlight
symbiotic relationship.
Because we can't do it without each other.
Right, exactly.
One of the observations I'm going to make is that with respect to pro bono work, every large firm, certainly in Houston, if not the United States, has a pro bono partner, or in our case, a whole department. And every lawyer, before they become a lawyer, while they're still law students and they're clerking at the firm, part of their experience is to be introduced to the pro bono department, the practice, the requirements, and the opportunities. Where I think your question is spot on and identifies an area that the big law firms can't meet by definition, and the agencies, nonprofits might not be able to meet, is the vast amount of practicing lawyers who do not go to big firms or to nonprofits and would not have that exposure until they start practicing and maybe somehow get an interest in that. So you've identified a need that I think needs to be addressed.
I had a question on that same note of pro bono outreach. How would you suggest, because we're one of the 3 fellows in Florida, how would you suggest that you go about as a fellow looking up or getting engagement of pro bono support and doing the outreach to find them?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the same ways that we're talking about. I mean, we have offices in Florida, we DLA Piper, but same thing. There are a lot of law firms in Florida that are doing pro bono work, and I'd be happy to talk to you, offline about making some connections or introductions. But I think all of this at the end of the day really is about relationship building and about communication, and doing that now, before there's another disaster, having those relationships in place, because there's always a need for pro bono, and there are always creative and innovative programs that you can be brainstorming with law firms about right here and now. And then, then those relationships will pay off in the future, regardless of what happens. So I'd be happy to talk to you.
And I would say too, I mean, what is really special about this program is that it combines different, organizations, and some have more kind of established pro bono, programs than others. I think you all can work together with the other organizations, like, if they already have a program, to make sure that you're part of it. But I also say, through collaboration with other nonprofits, especially those who already have a program, then I would say a lot of it is also kind of really attending trainings. Or CLEs. This is a great place to meet a lot of attorneys that kind of become. You can meet and get to know. So there are all kinds of ways you can do that. But I would say really develop relationships with, everybody you work with, I mean, at least this group, they all have also their networks, they have their organizations, they have their relationships, and that would be a good place to start.
Yeah.
I have a question regarding when you're interacting with your pro bono attorneys. I know, Jay, you were talking earlier about having the conversation with the attorneys about differences between their clients and your clients, particularly with culture, with lifestyle. So how do you address or approach the issues of trauma-informed representation, particularly people who have been impacted by Harvey, by Irma, for example?
Post-Harvey, we had a number of clients who, for whatever reason, and I'm not sure if this was a problem prior to the storm or not, but there was observable sort of uptick in clients who had substance abuse issues also. And it revealed itself through, so the pro bonos would contact us and say, I spoke to my client, they did not sound right. They did not sound like they did on the first interview, and we don't know what's going on. And we were fortunate in that a number of them had also been assigned counselors through other third-party organizations, and the counselors, although they can't reveal certain information to us and HIPAA and everything else, were able to say, okay, this is the type of issue they're having, this is what they still can do and can't do. Because we were concerned about, can they sign off on their appeal? Are they competent? What is going on? Is this a mental health issue? Is this did they have a stroke? Like, we really were concerned. And so I think, at least in our community, we have a pretty good working relationship with some community counseling programs. We always give referrals to every sort of matching service that should come along. So if someone calls into our intake unit and they have a Harvey problem, we do try to suss out if they need other assistance that we don't provide as well, and give them all those different contacts as well. That way they're more likely to let us work with those other programs as we're helping them. Because I think someone even mentioned earlier, no one really comes to you with the one problem that they think they have, right? They come with a host of issues that need to be addressed. So I guess the short answer would be, we try to get them all the matching assistance they can get from any of the organizations in our network, and we try to communicate with those organizations if it becomes an issue of whether or not we are still able, or our pro bono is able to legally represent them. Can they still consent to us filing things on their behalf? If we needed to go to a hearing, are they going to be able to appear and answer questions? We just try to, take it on a case-by-case basis.
And in addition to that, we do incorporate it sometimes within our trainings. So for instance, we had a guardianship training not long ago, and it required people to have several hours, and they get certification. So we reach out to other nonprofits who were able to give a presentation about the trauma-informed kind of approaches and how to deal with that. It's also important, I feel, for the organizations themselves. I'm actually looking for another organization to provide that for our staff. So it's also important to start with the actual nonprofit organization that handle the cases, because attorneys don't think of these things, to be honest with you. I know when I started with Catholic Charities, I thought myself as just the attorney. And then because we were dealing with, it was a social service agency, and we had kids who we are representing who had different issues, went through horrible experiences. I kind of learned to become attorney/counselor. I never can claim that I'm really qualified to make these assessments, but I learned how to deal with them and think of these things. And so that's also an important role that I feel that the nonprofits could play in providing the opportunity for the training. Not every attorney would be interested to do that. And then being, informed yourself of the different ways of dealing with that. I remember when we were assigning cases to pro bono attorneys, for instance, for kids. So some attorneys would come to me and tell me the kid is lying. They changed the story. Well, kids do change their stories every day, even if they are telling the truth. It's part of their development. So we had to do a lot of trainings on child development. So really, it's kind of, there's a whole, kind of resources out there, and you need to be able to identify what is needed and find the right people who can help with those issues. And I think for moving forward with whenever there is a crisis, whether it's you're helping somebody who went through domestic violence or someone who went through the trauma of such a huge, kind of disaster, these are going to be key and important in order for them even to be able to get the service. Even appearing in court, if they haven't taken care of the other side, they're not going to be able to testify or be able to even help themselves. So that should always be part of it. And there are different ways where you can fill that need.
So this is a question for the private bar attorneys. The question that I have is, and the goal is to frame this positively rather than negatively. When you're working with legal service organizations, and certainly none represented in this room, but what are some of your pet peeves? What are some of the challenges you face when you're dealing with those organizations? Things you wish they might do a little differently? Some things that have bothered you in the past?
Yeah, well, I think, and I'll jump in and start, but I think, I feel like I'm echoing myself or repeating myself, but it's all about that communication and that availability, so that when we do have a question or something comes up, that we're able to call the organization and to talk about it. The other thing that I think is really important is when you do develop relationships with law firms, and this is hard because you have to be very intentional about it, and everybody is so busy, right? We all wish we had more time, but to intentionally check in with one another, about your relationship, in terms of the organization working with the law firm. How is this going? Are we communicating well? Is there a way that we can be better in terms of communicating with you? How are you able to, what's motivating your lawyers? What really attracts them to these cases? Because there's a lot of good information that we can share with one another if we do intentionally try to set aside time to kind of do that check-in, I guess is the only other way I can think to describe it. And be able to really to hear one another. And every situation is different. I mean, responding to a disaster is very different than probably what's happening day to day, right? And so really being able to listen and to take that in and to make changes in terms of how you are working with one another, I think is really important.
I don't really have any pet peeves. I really don't. With nonprofits, now with my other clients, we don't have enough time. What I would recommend, really though, to follow up on the communications is if you've established a rapport with someone, to schedule on your Outlook calendar a monthly call. I mean, just to check in and see how the lawyers in that office are doing, whether those lawyers need pro bono work to discharge. Because that way, I am supposed to make sure that all of the lawyers in our Houston office have pro bono opportunities and meet their CLE requirements or their pro bono requirements. And I can't. I forget, or I get busy with other stuff, or I can't keep track of who's doing what. But if I had a monthly reminder or a call from someone who said, hey, we've got this opportunity, do you think there are some lawyers who could meet it? That would be very helpful, I think, to both of us. And then the other sort of just general advice I would give is look up the law firms in the area and see who their pro bono directors are, who their pro bono partners or of counsel are, and get to know those people. Because frequently, the lawyers who are going to be able to do and assist you will be some of the more senior lawyers at the firm. People who are going to be in transition mode, people who really are grateful for the careers that they've had and looking for opportunities to give back, which they might not have had when they were junior lawyers and way too busy establishing their careers or perhaps establishing their own families. And so there's a whole resource out there of senior lawyers that I find are frequently untapped by the pro bono organizations that seek to look for the more junior lawyers to discharge the work.
And even as a nonprofit, I can think of something that for sure we shouldn't be doing. You know, sometimes like you really need to do this intentionally within your organization. You can't have everybody contacting the firms without kind of checking in with each other, and because I mean, yes, you need to check in. You have to keep the communication, but then it might become too much when you're constantly kind of approaching them and asking questions and sending too many emails. Like I know our pro bono coordinator, one of the things sometimes kind of I ask her to send a certain message, so she would tell me, but Wafa, I just sent them an email to all the pro bono coordinators like a few days ago. So she really is very intentional on how often and when and how to kind of have the communication. And we need to also remember that firms go through all kinds of things. I mean, one of the best partners we had just merged with another firm. And they were used to doing pro bono in a certain way, and we got used. I mean, whenever we had complicated cases, we would call them, and they were always ready. So what we realize now, they are merged with another firm that their pro bono kind of model is completely different. So also kind of keeping and really do your homework and always find more about what's happening, who's who can do what. So in some instances, the only way to get the firm to do pro bono is to go to the partner, the managing partner, because they have to they don't have that culture, and unless it comes, I mean, if they don't allow them to kind of put the hours, nobody's going to do any of your pro bono cases. So being able to reach the right person and get their buy-in might be really key. So it's all kind of, I mean, really, and the problem with the whole issue is when I first started doing pro bono, I thought it was too much work, and it's true. It is too much work, but it's really worth it because the people will not get the help. They will not be able to access really justice unless you put that hard work and be ready to do it. So that's kind of really my 2 cents about it.
And just one little quick point. I would also recommend, if you can, not sometimes you just can't do this, but if you can meet in person.
Absolutely.
I feel so old-fashioned when I say that, but if you can go out for a cup of coffee or tea and meet in person. We do so much, right, by email and everything, but we all know that that's the best.
So we do luncheons, like quarterly luncheons with the pro bono coordinator. Not all of them come, but those who come, we're able to ask them, how are we doing? Do you want us to do differently? It's also, I mean, these things are important. So.
That's great. Did you have a question? Okay. So I know we're running short on time, so I just kind of wanted to tie in one of the themes we've had running through all of this is success stories. So I was curious if any of you have pro bono case placement and success stories, Harvey related or otherwise, but just sort of things that you think of are a really good example of the real benefit that this partnering has and the way it can really help to address people's needs.
One thing that I think is a success story that I can't take credit for, I guess the private firms would have to take credit for it, is that we had an interesting number of partnerships where in-house counsels from companies that were clients of the private law firms would partner with the firm, and then they would take it in teams of 2 or more. And it just fostered sort of this, it was like, I don't want to say it was cool, but it made this environment where they could talk to each other in-house about the cases, and they had actual litigators on their case where they were transactional, like ExxonMobil came on, but they came on exclusively with Hunt and Williams attorneys, and they worked in teams. And that was really nice to see, and it sort of helped me think about other ways to approach firms about taking cases. You can do this with your client. They might like it. You might like it. And so that was interesting. I want to call that a success story. And I think What else was a really good success story? I mean, I just think the fact that we placed every case was an incomparable success story, because on a day-to-day basis, most pro bonos know that you have some cases you just can't place, and you take them back in and you work them, but we just didn't have that situation, and the pro bonos were so willing, and so, I mean, it was really heartening to see the way the community came out post Harvey. So I think post-disaster, in general, I would call it a victory. I think it was a really good success story for the way our community responded to that.
And I would say that's kind of also true, but some of the things that I feel like we're really proud of is that for most cases, when you have last-minute cases with very short deadlines, that's also kind of, it translates into this should be a staff, case. But we were able to kind of form a panel of attorneys who were really willing to, and it was a big group, like when we have, a case with a really very short deadline, we were able to email all of them, and then, someone would pick the case. So it's just these very hard to place cases that you feel like, yeah, I've done something, not the regular cases that you usually kind of put out there. And the other thing that I feel like has been really good with this new funding that we kind of received for working on Harvey, one of the things that has been happening, there's a lot of collaboration that is going on with the service providers who kind of fix homes and do the other stuff that is very needed for kind of the people who were affected. So one of the things that we were able to get through is that they came to us and they say, I mean, some of the clearing title cases, for instance, take a very long time. Some of them you can resolve within a short time. So can they wait and live in their house when everything is broken and they can't? So we were able to kind of do something we usually don't do, is kind of prepare a letter after we do an initial assessment to say, well, we believe that this case, they could get clear title with the legal, assistance, and so they started getting the help they needed, and that enabled us to do better in terms of giving these cases to attorneys without having this, they have to have it now in order to fix the house. So I feel there are a lot of very creative ways that, we all could work together in order to make it possible for people to get the help they need. So.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I mean, in terms of the collaborations that come about and the relationships that are developed in that moment that then live on for years to come, which is always a success. I would also say internally for us, I mean, it's amazing. I love hearing these stories that you place every single case. I mean, that is extraordinary and so heartwarming. And I know for us at DLA Piper, we had dozens and dozens of lawyers that were able to pitch in and jump in right away. But as I mentioned before, my hope is that we also keep in mind this is a marathon and not a sprint, if you will. It's going to take a long time. And I think the transformative nature of pro bono always feels like such an important success. I mean, not only ultimately are we helping people in those moments of despair and hopefully giving people hope at a time that can feel very hopeless, that is a success. Being able to provide clients a voice, to make them feel like they're being heard, that is a success. Every single one of those individuals and clients, that's transformative. And then that's also transformative for our lawyers. They become better lawyers, and they have an experience that then they want to come back and have again. And there's nothing better than that.
It certainly was transformative. In my old age, I've become a liberal, and so that's something really mind-changing. You will be amazed at the capacity for good that exists in your fellow lawyers. And how much we really want to help people out, regardless of whether we are in a nonprofit pro bono organization or in a private law firm. because so many of the things that we've done have changed the way we look at life and the way we want to end our lives. I would also say that it's really helpful. It's a privilege to work at DLA where we have actual information in terms of internal stories letting us know of actual results for various clients that inspire and encourage the rest of us to continue working on cases and causes that are sometimes unpopular, but that need to be handled. So just as we started, I'd really like to end with a congratulations to all of you and a thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you. And if we could offer a round of applause and thank all of our panelists. This was excellent. I really appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much.